So it's 4:16, and I'll call the meeting to order. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Greg Swanson, any discussion? All in favor? The agenda is approved. Approval of the last minutes. Watson, Briggs. Any discussion of the last minutes? All those in favor of approving the minutes? The minutes are approved. Does not look like we have any unfinished business. So new business, moving vacation projects, funding, and meeting.
Sorry.
Oh.
Are we supposed to provide feedback this time on the ULAM framework, or how do you want that? That was unfinished.
It's unfinished, but I didn't know that no one has said they're ready to talk about it today, and
Okay.
they was not here.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, we can do it in January.
Okay, very good.
So Brian is here. He had some items to discuss with me about some projects. So
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. There's been a couple things that have come across your desks recently at some council meetings, and I wanted to provide some context for how they impact some of our programs. One of them was our vehicle purchases for our fleet for the Major Streets project. I think that was a couple council meetings ago. And then also there was an item about assessing the multi-lane roads and looking at road diets. And so what I wanted to do is just frame where the resources come for these programs and how we manage that. Our Major Streets Fund has about $13 million in it, and that all comes from state shared revenue. About $9 million of that is for operation and maintenance activities. So to some degree, those are things a little bit out of our control. It's, it's labor, it's the materials, it's the plowing, it's the pothole repair, salt. Obviously, some of those things fluctuate based on the year, but it seems like over time, that's what we typically spend.
You said 9 million.
About $9 million. And then we have fleet charges, which are about $1 million. So our fleet charges include the depreciated cost of vehicles. So once we purchase new vehicles, we're putting, resources away for replacement. And then also that is used for purchasing when the time comes, there's enough in the fund that we use that, the money that we put away to pay for the vehicle. So one of the challenges we had this year is fleet costs have gone up tremendously. And that was what came across, your desk. I think the impact to our Major Streets Fund is going to be about $1.4 million. So that's $1.4 million for 7 trucks over what we have already put aside for them. And it's inflation, it's availability of components. These trucks, by the way, are 2 years out. So if we order them now, we still get them for 2 years. Like it's sort of a new world that we're living in. So what does that mean for FY25? So in FY25, if we add the additional $1.4 million to what our fleet charges were for the year, which was about 900,000, say $1 million, we're at 2.4 million. That in a normal year, we would have about $3 million available in our Major Streets funds for doing resurfacing projects or other structural needs for roads. But because of this hit that we're taking for fleet, we're down to about $1.5 million. So that's what's going to be available in FY25. And to some degree, this has a little bit of a cascade effect because the next round, this doesn't completely deal with the fleet components that have to be replaced. So in 26, we may be in a little bit of a similar situation. So it's taking away the funds that we need in order to do and meet some of our resurfacing goals. You'll see very shortly some of our PACER data that's come out also. So you'll be able to see we have been making some good headway, but we're not done, and we're going to need to continue to make those investments. So I wanted to just share that, and then that $1.5 million that we'll have in 25 for resurfacing. If there's additional things that council, other priorities that council has for us to invest in, like the assessment of multi-lane roads, we're anticipating that that's about $1 million ask. Now, we are not planning on doing that all in 1 year, but I just wanted this group to understand the implication of those elements, that they're not just pocket change in the scope of what the budget is, they have real impact. So, so for example, in FY '25, if we have 1.5 million now, down from 3 million, and we start chipping away at that another 250 or 500,000 to do some of this other work around traffic calming priorities, then, that has a meaningful impact in terms of the percentage on what the body of work we're planning to do in those areas. So really, that was the message I wanted to deliver. As we think about these things, the size of the pie is fixed, because again, in this case, it's state shared revenue. In the case of local streets, there's state shared revenue, but also a local millage. But together, those resources are sort of fixed. So if we're asking to do more of something that wasn't planned or budgeted, then we have to take away something else. And those are the decisions that we struggle with. We don't always get direction from council when there is like an ask to do more of this. Well, what are we not going to do? And there's also pressure on staff to deliver what we said we were going to do. That's part of our budget, that's part of our plans, and it's part of the budgets that we move forward. So Milton thought it was appropriate that I bring that to this group and just share what some of the things that we're struggling with. Don't have a solution. That wasn't the intent, but just to raise this. If you have thoughts, I think staff would appreciate in some cases some direction on if there are things that are being added that we don't have plans for. If council could provide some direction on what they want to take off the plate, that would be helpful. Not maybe in every case, but in certain cases, that would provide us the guidance that we need so we can move forward.
Question, Brian?
I maybe have a more general question. That could certainly slow down council-initiated resolutions, so I acknowledge that as a trade-off. But if there's a council-initiated resolution that would have a trade-off or fiscal impact like that, what would it take for, even if it's, hey, we can't move forward with this at this meeting, because we really need to give council a one pager on what this means in terms of impact on the department. And so they slow down a resolution for a meeting, but would give us more of a broad overview of kind of the fiscal impact on the department of some of the things that we're initiating. Just an idea of something we could maybe do to make sure that we're always thinking about that from a bigger picture. I don't know if that information would always be available in 2 weeks either. If that's something that we pull together, we also just heard last night about staff resources and the number of people that are doing multiple things. But it's something I've sometimes wondered about in the past and seems relevant to this.
I can just speak to kind of what things have been like of late. We're doing a little struggling on trying to keep a handle on resolutions. We don't do that many ordinances, but it's more resolutions because they're still kind of all over the place. So it may be in the law department. You may not know it's there. It comes out. We got to figure out what does a person try to do. And so as we communicate with the maker or creator of the resolution, sometimes I'm saying to them, there's no one to do this, whatever this is. So if we're going to do it, it means we have to figure out how to hire somebody to do it, or somehow farm it out that has an impact to it financially. But it's still at the discretion of the developer of the resolution if they want to still bring it forward or not. We're not written into the resolution saying there's a price tag here because there's no place for that to happen. But that information is conveyed when we know about it.
And I'm wondering more from our process standpoint. Right now, our rules allow anyone to put something on, but if staff sees something gets submitted and says like, hey, this is gonna clearly have a budget impact, maybe we add a step to, you don't just get to put it on the agenda, but we require a fiscal analysis or whatever that is before it can be added. And that's kind of the language from this
Yeah.
meeting, or from this.
Like the legislature.
Yeah, I mean, the legislature has a fiscal impact statement.
Yeah.
And we do get fiscal impact statements when it comes to ordinances, like, when it comes to ordinances, I've seen good feedback. For example, when we passed the ordinance about the bike storage and donating the impounded bikes to nonprofits, we mentioned that would have no fiscal impact. And, so I think that that's a good, it would be good, and I'm wondering, right, it's like, building that in, so that, it doesn't rely on maybe catching something and sending a council-wide memo, but just always having some feedback. And we see it, I think, also on the planning side, we see the staff reports with feedback. I know that we would probably be maybe overkill for every single resolution, but at least some notion if there is a fiscal impact. And the other thing, I think a lot of resolutions are passed without time dates in terms of the council asking for report from the administrator, but no sort of deadline or no expectation as to when that's going to be. And so if we were to start including some of those, also knowing is that possible given the personnel requirements, if we want to get a report back when we could expect it. I think those two in terms of staff time and fiscal impact might be good.
So I think I can understand the desire to have a fiscal impact. I would say that a lot of times, like in the case of this road diet resolution, we had pretty extensive conversations. It was pretty clear that it was going to be a fiscal impact, and there was reasons that it was written as it was, so that during the budget process, we would get that information because it was going to take a long time to identify what the actual costs were associated with it. So it wouldn't have been a delay of one meeting to do something like that. We essentially delayed it until the budget process so we could be given that information and weighed that against our other priorities that council has, because obviously we have a priority to advance our transportation plan, but there's only so much money to go around as well. So how can you, how do we move this forward in a way that it recognizes our limited resources? So I don't know. I mean, I can understand the desire to have a fiscal impact. I don't know, practically speaking, if that actually, there's only so much limited. That could be putting something out 6 months or something, depending on when something comes in. Should get that information back.
But what I'm hearing you say is we were doing, in the case that you're mentioning, we were going to do that anyway because there was recognition that we needed it and it would take a while.
We still move forward sort of that priority as a council, that this is something that we wanted to do. But in terms of actually budgeting the funds for it, I think that will come up as part of the, the budget process.
And I guess what I wanted to just share was that we can include it in the budget process, but something else is going to be impacted. So there's not a clear method or pathway to share that. I mean, is that staff's discretion to say, all right, we have to do this, we're focusing on this, and now we've just decided, well, we're not going to do this. But that might be a priority of somebody. It might be associated with some of our plans or some of our aspirational goals inside of our plans, but those trade-offs exist. And I think in some cases, what staff is seeing is that we're getting a lot of priorities in front of us, and we can't do all of them. So at some point, we need some direction from council on, here are the things that you don't have to do, even though we've identified them in a plan or they're a priority. We tend to not see that when some of these resolutions come forward with, here's something that's priority, we want you to move forward, provide us a cost for this. But there's not a recognition that the pie is only a fixed size and something else has to come out.
Shouldn't that come as part of the budget presentations that we receive, kind of the departmental presentations, like, okay, here's what was asked for in year, here's our supplies, here's what would need to be cut back is to accomplish those additional pieces.
But
I think the problem though is that once we pass a resolution saying this is a priority, then
right,
we have to, if it comes back, wow, this is going to be hugely expensive, and we're going to have to cut a whole bunch of things, then we have to go back and rescind that resolution or walk it back or amend it or something.
yeah, I think what we're doing right now is, what I'm hearing is like passing a bunch of unfunded mandates, and then we get to the budget, and it's like, oh, well, we said this is a priority, but now we're just not going to do it. And so I think that also creates a mixed message too. I mean, there were 2 articles, I think, on the, like, if we get to the budget and we're like, oh, this is going to be too expensive, we're rolling it back now. And staff has now spent 6 months, I assume, likely hearing from folks saying, well, but we passed this direction. This is the direction you should be moving in. But we haven't acknowledged any of the trade-offs in terms of financing.
And the budget is passed, you know, at a certain point of the year, and there are
Right.
things come up and change over the course, right? Something like this, the vehicle thing wasn't anticipated. We had planned, we budgeted a certain amount, and now we're having to look at how do we fill the gap. And then other things come up throughout the year. So if the budget that was established at the beginning of the fiscal year was not touched, I think we wouldn't probably be having this conversation, because we would have our marching orders and we're executing.
Right.
But it's throughout the course of the year, we're pivoting to address other initiatives, things that have come up, resolutions, priorities, feedback, and then unanticipated, like a storm that required $1.5 million to clean debris up in the city that we didn't anticipate. And so then we're still going to need help, but we have to do it. So then we need to say, you know, we came up with a solution for that, but there is always something that is not unanticipated that we're addressing.
This is also slightly off topic, but references back to part of the conversation. What level of, so we have the, well, yeah, the commission.
Yeah.
To what level does the administrator have access, or is that specifically?
The administrator and Sarah, Ms. Higgins, get a copy of every ordinance and resolution request that is submitted. I'm working on some technicalities, but they should.
Okay.
There's the IP breakdown, but they should.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're also, because otherwise we should be submitting to you also. Or you should both have views. In my perspective, you should both have visual on what we're working on. It shouldn't come as a surprise either.
They should, through the SharePoint system, get the same email that I do.
The issue that we're trying to work through, so let's say we see it. You can't always tell by just seeing what it's called, what's involved. So the city attorney's office is doing what they do. We may need to have someone actually vet that to determine what's involved. We have to have an understanding of what it is to know who to assign it to. And so that's where we get into the administration giving some feedback to the author of it, and then they decide what they're going to do about it. Now, I will say there are some cases where the author might realize there's a financial issue, but for other reasons, they still want to be on the record in support of X. So if they want to move forward regardless,
Right.
well, that's their call. So,
Well, and that's where I'm wondering if we need to address that aspect. I mean, if we had a step that was required before something can be on the agenda, it requires that communication with you guys either ahead of time. If there's communication happening ahead of time, it wouldn't necessarily slow down. But if the first time you guys are finding out about a resolution is when it lands on an agenda, which is not what happened in this specific case. But if that happens, then I don't feel so bad that we would say like, sorry, this isn't ready. because we haven't checked all the boxes.
So the item, agenda item that I put on is actually exactly the.
Okay, all right. So then I guess do we anything else?
What a great segue.
Any other questions?
Well,
Well, it sounds like
I just have one other sort of, I mean, this is something that's going to come back up, in the budget discussions for fiscal year 25, and it is, is the appropriate, forum to ask the questions about, the trade-offs? I mean, will that be sort of the submitted budget questions as it was last year, or I know that we haven't exactly figured out how the budget presentations are going to go, but I just want to make sure that there is a forum that we can have, or like, have this, the questions and trade-offs, I guess. The work session.
The difficulty we're having is more than the process. So this time in March, you all will hear from staff on what they asked for or are thinking about. Then in April, you'll hear what I'm actually presenting to you. So the missing part that's not really seen is Brian asked for 9 things because he has been told there's priorities that people want. I have already cut the 9 to 6 because the 9 costs more than what he has. What you don't see, you're just getting the end product, okay, balance. You may or may not be cognizant of, well, there was actually 9 things and Milton took 3 of them out. There's no way for you to know that. And the way we do it, if you were the submitter of one of them, you would say, well, where's item 7? And then I would tell you, well, I cut that because he would have been out of balance. And then you all have to decide, well, I want 7 put back. And then we're going to ask you, well, what do you want me to take out? Or you can say, we need you to put 7 in and make the budget balance. So you're simply telling me 7's got to be there. You're not telling me what has to come out. I just got to take something out so that 7's there. It's your all's call which way you want it to go.
And the other thing I would just add to that is that, when you see the budget, you'll see, the eventual allocations that we have come up with as a team. And if you feel like things aren't sufficiently funding maybe some of your priorities, that's an opportunity to say, hey, I see this is here, but it's not really at the level that we think is necessary to achieve our goals, which is probably more likely the scenario, I think, in some of these cases where we're not just eliminating things, but we're funding, we're trying to balance the funding to try to chip away at all of the things as opposed to everything, which we can't do because we don't have the resources to do it. But you may not think we balanced it in a way that meets your needs.
And not that, disagree with one of you, but I got a real problem with just doing mediocre 9 things. I'd rather do 6 things very well and 3 no, than to give everybody $1 and say it's all great, and then the quality of what you produce for the dollar is not acceptable to the public, to you, to us. So sometimes it is, that can't be in the budget.
All right.
If you want the roads plowed and all of that, you do need vehicles. Some of them are on the sidelines, and that's creating problems for us, so they're overdue.
Well, thank you.
Okay, yep.
I had actually said consideration for the ordinances, because I thought maybe I'd say something about ordinances since they have the force of law, and I was going to start there. But based on this discussion, we can talk about resolutions as well. But I have also noticed one of the things that when we get a resolution or an ordinance, either the draft or review, I have, as a matter of course, gone to Sarah or Milton and said, we've got this, and are there any administration considerations? I think it's, for an ordinance, I think two things are critical. One, we need a department to enforce it, right, because it is law. We need a department to enforce it. And two, I think the fiscal impact of an ordinance, because it's going to perpetuate, resolutions are sometimes like limited time effort. Ordinances are hopefully perpetual. So there should be some sort of fiscal assessment of it. So my proposal was going to be that for every, starting with ordinances, for every ordinance request, the administration or the administrator identifies the department responsible for enforcing, the key staff person, because sometimes an ordinance can involve multiple departments. It can involve community services, it can involve public works. So, but if there is a question that either Milton has or any of you have, a key staff person that you can contact for administrative questions, and then an assessment of the fiscal impact of the ordinance should be included when it is presented, or an ordinance amendment, either which way. The question that I had was, should it be presented here first, or should it just be presented to all council? Like, how do we see that? The fiscal impact, the department that will be enforcing it, and the administration side person responsible, along with the attorney side person responsible for it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with it. I just know that sometimes, and I'm going back to the last council, some people bring ordinances and they don't really want everyone to know where they're going. They're right. We say, well, have you discussed that with anybody? No. And it's my work product, and you are obligated to be confidential because I'm telling you that. Well, if we get that, then we don't say anything to anybody. We work on it as they presented it. And so to come here, maybe with this council that works. With the last council, there wouldn't. It's just an area of sensitivity with some people on some topics.
Where is it written though, that it needs to be kept confidential? I want to challenge that.
It's not, yeah, really.
It's not written, it's just for the administration to be successful, a council person has to be able to trust. And if you tell me something, regardless of what it is, and you tell me you don't want it to go anywhere else, I hold it.
So I was going to say that I think, I don't know why that would come here first. But this goes to kind of what I was saying before, that there are certain things that maybe should be attached to the agenda for every one of these things. If it's a fiscal impact analysis, if it's a statement about the enforcement tendency, whatever that is, before it can be on the agenda. And I think that's one of the things that I've been most surprised about during my time on council is we're actually quite loose with how we let things on the agenda compared to other bodies.
Yeah.
And so there are obviously benefits to that, but this is one of the trade-offs we have, is that sometimes unfinished products are on the agenda, or things that we don't have enough information. I'm hearing we don't have enough information where we shouldn't be making a decision yet. Maybe we could, but maybe we shouldn't. And so I wonder if this is a broader conversation about us visiting the rules as a body here, about what are the requirements for something to be on the agenda besides a number of co-sponsors.
Yeah, it's funny because I was actually going to bring that up under upcoming business because I've had a couple of council members mention it to me as something they'd like to explore.
I don't disagree. I think what you're talking about in terms of just making sure that we have informed process makes sense. I also think there's a responsibility for us as council members to ask questions at the table if there are things that we don't feel like we have information on. But I will caution that there's a bit of a status quo bias to some of the things that we're putting in place because each of us can think about things that we have put forward that are challenging the organization in some capacity, and those systems are not in place always to make things go forward. And so it is a little clunky for some time to make things work. And the correct question is, is it better organizationally to have a renters commission that doesn't have enforcement and doesn't have, a staff person associated with it and start doing those things with the city? Or do we have to wait the many years that we might have in place to get those types of things in place, or are we able to move forward, my stuff with transportation oftentimes, but, each of us, there's labor, there's a whole bunch of different things that each of us has priorities on that, we've each pushed the envelope a little bit and we can imagine what that might look like. So I'm not saying that I disagree necessarily that we should have these in place. I just want to caution that as a council trying to, a lot of community saying go faster, go harder.
What do you envision, I guess, Sure, I will acknowledge that, yes, that there's an obligation, I would say, from the community to tell us to go faster, and work harder on things. But I guess we also have, I view it as like we have a responsibility to make sure that we're not just passing it quickly. And so I guess if we have that information, we still have the ability to make a decision at the table, but we just have more information about it. So maybe we hear there is not currently an enforcement body, and like, if we're gonna pass something, knowing that there's not an enforcement body and knowing that we're not allocating money to it, that's a decision we can make. It would probably be not the best one, in most of the time, but those are decisions that we then would make, I guess, in a more informed way.
I just wanted to always say that.
But I agree. I just think for me, I guess it's more of a like, it requires us to work more closely with staff. And that's where I don't think that it requires either of you to disclose it to the rest of us. But we should be working with the appropriate staff people before presenting it to our colleagues. That's my view.
Yeah. Well, and, to quickly revisit the confidentiality thing, when I would envision, if anything, sort of there is a council member working on this. I think of one particular example that I won't go into the details on, but would have been really helpful, to know that there was another council member working on it, even if, they're working at cross purposes. But that's kind of a little bit of a separate discussion. But that example did certainly get into, we could have used a fiscal analysis on what was being proposed. And I think that would have helped us have both the knowledge at the table and, the information for the community to understand truly why we chose not to pass it and go a different route.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that perhaps we want to try and amend the current rules around agenda setting to incorporate more information from council. But do we want to try and do that for any item that goes on the agenda or limit it to ordinances like I was suggesting? I was taking a baby step. But if you want to go all out, I'm okay with that.
But I was going to say, I want to acknowledge that what we are discussing also has a resource impact.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so, because it requires, hypothetically, you guys are looking at everything that's on the agenda anyway, but if something else has to be attached to it, that creates additional work.
Yeah.
I mean, I could envision something for a fiscal impact, it could be as simple as a statement that has no fiscal impact, versus, a one pager.
Yeah.
Or, I imagine we need to have some conversations though, with like, does that have implications for Marty, or like, who is the one that is ultimately doing that?
Marty will determine the fiscal part, but it's really my office to determine, is there actually somebody who could do it?
Right. The enforcement, yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes there isn't. It's a policymaker decision on whether you want to go ahead and at least get it on the books, so you have the direction. But we're going to be clear that there's nobody to actually do that. And Marty would say, and you can't afford to hire anybody to do it. Or you could if X happened. That's kind of how, we all have to work together.
And then it also informs that, I mean, it doesn't mean that the ordinance shouldn't pass, but means we need to be thinking about it in our next budget cycle.
In terms of like what I like, or what I find helpful, like to see, I do think that a model would be some of what we see out of planning. One example was, around the impact of the downtown premiums. There's a portion of that physical impact that basically said, some of this is unknown. It might result in fewer affordable units, but on balance, we don't think much will change. And so those planning staff reports on different zoning changes and different changes in premiums, like those have been kind of concise in the feedback you get from OSI, different departments weighing in on the different site plans and zoning changes. That's the structure that I think could maybe be replicated, but I don't know. I mean, I think that those, just going back to giving a little more room for, it isn't as long and perhaps slowing the process if it's something that we'll have to wait and see on. Exactly. It's okay to have that, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And that was one of my concerns would be, I would only want to do the fiscal impact for things that are truly knowable. Like
Right.
we know
Right.
that building this thing is going to cost X amount of dollars.
Right.
I think of something like best value contracting, where people kind of have a feeling that it might cost us more. And, we would have passed that anyway because the voters specifically changed the charter in order to give us the authority to do that, in order to hold true to our values. But there's no way to say it will cost X amount more because you just don't know. It all depends on, are there change orders, that drive up the cost of a contract, or who's going to bid, or, so I guess I just want to make the distinction between things that are knowable and things that are not.
I think I might have to work on crafting some language that I bring back to you for, how the rule change might read, where there's ascertainable fiscal impact, or just, the administrative statement regarding something that maybe I need to put pen to paper so that you can read something. Does that make sense? Yeah, so, okay.
And I think to your question too about resolutions, I do think that there are, from time to time, there are resolutions that do have a significant fiscal impact, and I don't know what the threshold is, or if it's more just like you look at this and you go, oh, this, I've heard you say that actually, that it's going to take us some time to do this research and it will have an impact on staff, and there's cost to that. So I do think that it's worth knowing that as well.
Maybe it could be a requirement for ordinances to have some sort of accompanying information and permissive at the administrator's discretion for resolution. Yeah, I think I have to some writing and detail that way in the agenda rules.
I think as far as seeing the language she comes up with, take a real look at it. You know, part of our friction point, so we have 850 people, I just say that in round numbers. The bulk of where we focus falls on 50 of the 800. And that's the problem. Firefighters do what they do, cops do what they do, people running the water treatment plant, but we get into a lot of quality of life issues. It's a very narrow group of us who have to actually do it. And so what you heard John say last night, you know, one fire marshal, one business attorney, we got one person doing payroll. So that's where the stack up comes, and we're doing you all a disservice by just saying, yeah. So yeah, we have it, but it's number 38 on the list. We'll try to get to it, don't know when that will be, and then everybody's frustrated because yeah, it's there, but you just can't get to it.
I agree. I mean, I think that's more frustrating is when we say something should happen and then it doesn't because there aren't resources. Because I think then we've set an expectation for folks and are saying it's a priority, but we haven't backed that up with resources if we haven't made that decision ahead of time.
I will just add one additional thought to this, because I think it's one of the challenges about there is a fiscal impact, and it's okay. I mean, I think the point that having this conversation is we will know that going into a vote, that there will be a fiscal impact. But it's not like the budgets are developed from zero-based budgeting, or you're not recreating the budget from scratch each time. So it's often difficult for us at budget time to understand, like, take away the layers. Where is it that we really want to buck something out and say, okay, here's our new course of action. We just know that we're trying to move the needle in our community in a certain direction, and we're going to have to do that even slowly. So I think there's a little bit of a challenge sometimes in if we put ourselves down, we set this course for ourselves, we are going to be hit with a lot of things that has a fiscal impact, which is not necessarily a reason, I think, to not do something. Of course, it's just, I think that.
But I think there's a difference between passing a resolution directing the administrator to prioritize something in the budget versus directing something to happen without funding it too. And maybe it's just a different way of thinking about how we're crafting resolutions. Acknowledging that you might also say, like, all right, well then, here you have told me that we need to prioritize X, so that means here's where I'm making cuts. But then that's another decision we have to make.
And then to me, that's just business.
Right.
Of course.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening.
It's happening now, yeah.
And it's just better informed us.
Anything else on this? Information and upcoming business. I felt like at the last meeting, folks just kind of acquiesced to me when I said, like, hey, should we have a 4:30 start time? I've heard from a couple of folks that 4:15 is maybe a little bit better, and I have worked out my calendar to make that work. So if folks would prefer to have 4:15 start time, I am told that we can adjust the calendar invite. So I just wanted to put that back out for reconsideration.
I'm fine with whatever.
We're good.
No, but what do you prefer?
4:15.
Okay.
The mayor prefers 4:15 as well, I think. So,
Okay.
he's not here, so I'm happy to do 4:15 if we want to adjust that.
Excellent. Done.
Okay. any other information are coming to? All right. Public comment. Looks like we have one caller, so, caller ending in 901, if you have anything that you would like to say at public comment, you could raise your hand. Do we remember, is it star 9 to raise the hand? Yes, star 9. All right, seeing no public comment and no one being in the room here, public comment is closed. Anything else before we adjourn? We're adjourned. Oh,
Just a reminder, we have a session on Monday.
Closed session.
yeah.
Monday.
I would feel better. I think we don't have to make a motion to adjourn, but I can,
Oh.
do we have a motion to adjourn?
Oh, that's true.
Great. Watson, all those in favor? Liquor